Hello everybody, my name is Brady and we are back with another React video, and today we're going to be checking out part 3 of the Otto von Bismarck series by Extra History, and I've changed the layout a little bit. I hope that doesn't bug you. You probably haven't even noticed, but I change it compulsively every couple months because I feel the need to just tweak things, and I got a lot of new equipment, I got a new computer and stuff, so I thought it's good a time as any. As a wise man once said, if it ain't broke, change it once every couple months. So I think this one's going to be a lot of fun. We're going from young man Otto to old man Otto, which should be kind of cool. Visually, it's kind of weird going from this on my left to this on my right. I'm going to need to adjust a little bit. And towards the end of the previous one, we go through that change, and I'm still imagining him as this one on the left when he's clearly got to be something a little bit in the middle. They mention beards, and I'm like, wait, he hasn't had a beard this whole time. Oh, wait, we are kind of limited in the amount of depictions of him we're going to end up having, and we're not quite at this one on the right. So you just got to let me use my imagination a little bit. I get that. But I am going to have a little bit of trouble letting this side go, because that's always a fun time in people's biographies. The young, wild side, seeing them make mistakes, seeing them a little less politically calculating. But I'm really excited to see where we go with this. I'm not sure what the title Iron and Blood means, but I guess we'll see. Let's get it started.
Radical to pragmatic, he was at last offered a position in which he would shine. The position of envoy, diplomat, and deal-maker.
Sick.
Bismarck's tutelage in the diplomatic craft was swift. As he wrote to his wife, "I am making rapid progress in the art of using many words to say nothing at all." He wrote this from Frankfurt. He had been assigned as the Prussian envoy to the Diet of the German Confederation, that being the body that was supposed to figure out how the whole mess of 39 German states were to work together. But working with the Austrians was the furthest thing from Bismarck's mind.
That's actually that's a really interesting position here. I don't know what kind of demand there is for a position like that. That feels like one of those jobs that you'd have to fight to not get. I don't know. That's kind of how it feels like a total mess. He clearly seems to be willing to do a lot of the stuff that other people weren't, as evidenced by the previous one. He put himself out there during periods where it probably could have damaged him if things went really, really poorly. So he's highly ambitious, which means like he's either going to go everywhere or he's going to fall big time. And given this guy's undoubtedly massive legacy, I think we know which way it's going to go.
He was there to assert that Prussia was Austria's equal, and he did this with aplomb by lighting a cigar. See, smoking in the assembly was a privilege granted only to Austrians, but when the Austrian representative sitting next to him took out a cigar and began to smoke, Bismarck cracked out one of his own and, saying nothing, lit up. The press loved it. His enemies loved it too. When he returned to Berlin, one of them claimed publicly that the only thing Bismarck actually accomplished in Frankfurt was burning a cigar. And, of course, because old habits die hard, one thing led to another, and the ever-diplomatic Bismarck found himself once again on the field of honor, trading shots with a fellow Prussian over a cigar burnt to snub the Habsburgs.
I'm actually delighted at how this one is going so far, because I was afraid that we were going to have too massive a change. When we go from that, with that visual change, I was assuming like maybe we skipped over a little bit of emotional change, a little bit of maturity, but it's clearly not going to be a clean break. We're not being introduced to a brand new Bismarck. This is definitely the same guy, and I'm always excited whenever we can talk about dueling, because I love learning about European customs when it comes to dueling, because although there are formal customs when it comes to dueling, there's also a lot of informal stuff that varies from place to place, so it's always really cool to learn about that stuff, because when I learn about it in the United States, it's got some haphazardness to it, and sometimes I like to see the more formal stuff that you see in a lot more of the European duels. Bismarck, this is an interesting period because I don't imagine Europeans of this period dueling as much. It's just not an image that I can conjure up very easily in my head.
To another, and the ever-diplomatic Bismarck found himself once again on the field of honor, trading shots with a
Clearly
fellow
it happens
Prussian
a lot.
over a cigar burnt to snub the Habsburgs. But his time in Frankfurt taught him one thing. If the Prussians were ever to carry the same weight amongst the German states as their much larger rival, they would need allies. So he began to court what he saw as the two most valuable possible confederates for Prussia, Russia and France. But then, in October of 1857, the King of Prussia suffered a stroke. The king's brother, named Wilhelm, because of course he was, why should a family have to come up with more than one name, took over the leadership. This Wilhelm, though, considered Bismarck as nothing more than a petulant schoolboy. His words. Bismarck had a plan, though. Bismarck always has a plan.
I get the theme here. Courting Russia, I suppose, makes sense. Geographically, I see that. Courting France also makes sense. Of course, during this time, it's like a question, are you going to go France or are you going to go Britain? Like, that's always a big question that the United States has to ask. Sometimes we're stuck between the two great powers in our early history, so I think about that and I'm like, oh, are they in a similar situation to us? Or was there ever the question like, oh, are we going to maybe ask them for help? I don't know if that was ever on the table. Obviously, this is all very new to me, but it's really fun for me to think about. Yeah, I guess geographically, France makes a ton of sense. Maybe even more sense than the British in a united Germany.
He would counter this opinion in a most un-Bismarckian, and therefore most Bismarckian, way. He delivered to the prince a 92-page treatise detailing exactly how Prussia could abide by the letter of the agreement they'd signed that founded the German Confederation, while simultaneously aligning the other German states against Austria. Unfortunately, Wilhelm thought that was stupid. Bismarck was promptly assigned as the Prussian envoy to the Tsar. Because, I guess if you want to get rid of somebody in 18th century Europe, you just put him in St. Petersburg. Or better.
That is a very real thing. Oh my God. In the U.S., there is a really good example of this. We have Andrew Jackson, when he was president, he sent James Buchanan away. James Buchanan would go on to become president of the United States. He would be like right before Lincoln, but he ended up sending him away because he saw him as kind of a bit of an annoyance. So he actually just sent him to Russia. So that is a trend. It seems you got this, you got that. I'm sure there are other examples as well. It seems like a pretty normal thing to do from what I've seen now.
Better yet, Moscow. And
I thought that was
he would
clever.
Sit on ice until 1862. These were some of the bleakest years of his life. He was cut out of state affairs, he fell ill, he nearly lost the use of his leg, and even withdrew himself from Russian society as his ability to serve as a diplomat was hindered by the fact that everybody knew he was there because his sovereign didn't want him in Prussia. But, at last, a strange letter came, one saying that he should return to Berlin with haste. When he got there, against all odds, he was asked to serve as the head of government. You might reasonably ask, why?
Yes.
Why would the king who had so long snubbed him ask him to run the state? How could he go from a remote diplomatic posting to the head of domestic affairs? Well, because nobody else wanted the job. At least...
I was just bringing this up earlier because like, it's one of those positions where there's so much burden there, and it seems so much like if you're in a position where you can't really bet on yourself succeeding, you probably shouldn't take the position. So nobody wants to take the position and potentially fail and look bad, and I guess that's a great way for somebody who's a little bit more ambitious like Bismarck to step up. I love that these are things that I can find parallels for in my own area of study. I think that's what makes this so much fun. I wasn't expecting to find those sort of parallels with the Prussians. That's actually really interesting to me. I don't know. I never felt like the American history and essentially German history had that many parallels, but I never knew that much about German history, so maybe there's a little bit more there. I know I go back to the U.S. a lot. Maybe that's annoying for some people, but it's kind of my reference point for everything, so that's kind of the lens through which I understand things.
Nobody else the king thought wouldn't plunge the country into civil war. You see, for a year, the Liberal Party had refused to grant funds for the army. And if you know anything about Prussia, you know Voltaire's old adage: where some states have an army, the Prussian army has a state. Meaning that not funding the army had brought them to the brink of constitutional crisis, and the king's closest advisor's best suggestion was to have the army overthrow the Democratic Assembly and then figure it out from there. Which was basically 100% guaranteed to start a civil war. So the king figured, call in Bismarck, I guess. If he succeeds, fabulous. If he fails, then we'll just throw him under the anachronistic bus. As the announcement went out, no one in the wider world of Europe...
That's not bad. You're putting the right amount of pressure under him to succeed as well. I mean, it really is a win-win situation. I really appreciate kind of understanding. Sometimes you'll find political figures who go on to be like these great things, and it's amazing how many coincidences, how many accidents, how many opportunities they had to not be in the position that they were in. So this is I don't fully appreciate how important he's going to be. I'm hoping that I will by the end of this series, but the greater he ends up being, the more fun these little things that could have potentially thrown him off end up being.
Europe really thought he had a chance. Neither did many in Prussia. For 2 weeks, Bismarck had to scramble to pull together a cabinet, because nobody thought his government would last. Simultaneously, he also had to bolster the spirit of the king, who, in his dejection, was continuously on the brink of giving in. And in the midst of all of this, almost as an offhand remark to those who were debating funding the army, he said the words that would define him and define the age. The great questions of the day will be decided not by speeches and majority votes, that was the great mistake of 1848 and 1849, but by iron and blood. But in the midst of all the chaos,
there's the title.
Bismarck had a plan. Bismarck always has a plan. If he couldn't get to the Landtag to do what he wanted, well, then he would just have to do what he wanted anyway. You see, the king and the parliament were supposed to agree on any new budget before the government could collect taxes on that budget and do with them whatever they wanted. Everyone else took this to mean that the government could not collect taxes without Parliament's approval. But Bismarck had other ideas. See, the Constitution didn't really spell out exactly what the government was supposed to do if the king and the Parliament couldn't agree on a budget. So Bismarck just said, well, we don't have a new budget. Guess we have to keep collecting taxes based on last year's budget. And so sent out the king's tax collectors to do what they did best.
You know what? If you do have to default, that is probably the interpretation I kind of like the most. It's obviously self-serving or whatever, but like, yeah, if you can't get a budget, I totally get that. But also by asserting this power, he's really he's putting so much more power in himself, kind of assuming that nobody's going to go as far to challenge him in a way that's going to blow up in his face. Okay, it's daring. It really is daring. It's something you got to be careful about, because you might undermine the integrity of your legal documents, and then once you do that, you're opening things up to anarchy. But okay, I kind of like, if you do have to interpret that, I kind of like his interpretation.
For nearly half a decade, the government would continue to collect the 1861 budget, and the king would have a stream of revenue without asking Parliament for a thing. With that settled, Otto now had the prestige and the freedom to turn to what he saw as his larger project: positioning Prussia to be the preeminent power in Germany when the German states finally unified. He moved rapidly. First, he checked in with France to see if they would stay neutral, or perhaps even join Prussia if an armed conflict broke out between them and Austria. Then he wooed the smaller German states to begin voting with Prussia, even as he was baffling the Austrians.
France loves helping people who don't stand a chance.
Threats.
It seems like they do stand a chance, but like when I think of France, I'm just like, sometimes they'll step in and help people for no reason. The U.S. knows that. You don't have anything to gain? We'll help you anyway. It's that sort of thing.
And lofty promises about how much they could accomplish together. But even as he was holding his own in German affairs, his zeal abroad nearly cost him his ministry. A rebellion had broken out in Poland, and the Russians were eager to quell it, already sending in troops. Bismarck immediately dispatched Prussian divisions to the Polish border and sent a note to Russia basically saying, "Hey guys, we can totally help you with that." Soon, protests over this action broke out from the other major European powers, with France, Great Britain, and Austria all condemning Berlin. Many thought that Bismarck would have to resign over this, but the...
So I know that as Germany emerges, the British and the French, they're gonna start to come together a little bit more because they have like this common threat between the two, and that's one of the big things that's going to define the early 20th century. I know that much. Is this what's giving, perhaps this is like one of those moments that's like eye-opening to them, like France is thinking like maybe we'll help them, but now they're thinking like this might end up being a little bit of more of a mess than we were ready for. I don't know, that seems to be the vibe I'm getting.
The king, the very same one who had exiled him to Russia before, refused his resignation. Soon, Europe's ire turned from Berlin to St. Petersburg, and while the matter would blow over in time, to the Russians, this unification of the European powers against them brought to mind the recent and disastrous Crimean War, and in doing so, reminded them just why having an ally in Prussia might be valuable. But just as this affair was being put behind him, his great project was again in jeopardy. The Emperor of Austria had invited the Prussian king to a congress of princes to discuss the matter of German unification. Bismarck at once saw that the Austrians had stacked the deck, and any vote at such a conference would go in their favor. But he also knew that he wouldn't be able to convince the king that an invitation from other princes was a trap. So he took a different approach. The king was never the most secure of people, so Bismarck convinced him that the invitation was an insult, and that it should have been sent to him with much more formality. So the king declined to go. But then, days later, the King of Saxony rode up, bearing another invitation imploring the prince to come. Now he had been formally asked to attend by 30 princes with a king as the message bearer. There would be no convincing good old Wilhelm that this was a slight. Instead, in a meeting full of shouting, imploring, and not a little sobbing on both sides, Bismarck convinced the king that he would be giving up the independence of the Prussian army if he agreed to anything at this conference. And so, with Bismarck ripping off the door handle on the way out, once again, the king declined to attend.
That's kind of funny.
The course was set. The initial threats were in check. Now, at last, Bismarck could truly begin his project of iron and blood.
Dude, that one was really cool. I'm already used to the new character design for Bismarck. It just took this episode to do it. A lot of you have told me, I think one of you specifically, I wish I could remember, I would shout you out, but I don't know. One of you left a comment on a previous video. I don't even know which one it is. That's why I can't really go back and check, because I don't know where to look. From them, that while their history is good, it focuses typically on one perspective, and this whole time I've been thinking like, we are seeing this from a very Prussian perspective. We could have a whole nother version of this series told from the Austrian perspective. And while getting to know Bismarck and getting to know these figures on this side, it makes me feel a little bit sympathetic to them. It makes me wonder how I would feel if we went through this again from an Austrian perspective. Which side I feel like I would sympathize more with, because I'm not really sure if I would have any specific sympathy or not, but it's kind of fun to think about, and it is something to look into if I get more into this period. There's all sorts of potential for that. So I really like this one. So with my new setup and stuff, I'm able to streamline my content a little bit more. I'm able to produce more. So I'm going to probably be releasing the next few episodes of this pretty soon, like sooner than you might think. So keep a lookout. Yeah, you can probably expect them pretty often, maybe tomorrow. I think I'm gonna marathon this, so I think I'll watch the next one right now. The video won't be out the same time, but it'll be out the next day. All right, thanks for watching. Become a channel member. I'll see you guys next time.